Hi, we continue in Genesis 27 today after Isaac has sent his son Esau out in the field to get and prepare game for him before he blesses him, and Rebekah has been listening and now is going to give her son Jacob instructions. So I won't go over everything we've been looking at in the introductory video, which you haven't watched. I strongly encourage you to watch. I'm going to touch on some of the themes that I mentioned there, but there's much more in depth there. So we've been going through this chiasm in the Jacob cycle, and we're here in this purple part here, which matches the purple part in chapter 3 at the other side. And we've also been looking at the shape of the larger Jacob story as around these sections around Jacob and Esau that we're on now and again later, and then the section on Jacob and Laban in the middle. Another thing I really went over in detail in the introductory video are some of the questionable assumptions to be addressed in the story, which is to say assumptions that some scholars make without providing evidence, and then that shapes their interpretation. Last time we looked at the question of the supposed rights of the firstborn, whether they're divinely sanctioned, and realized they're not. There's nothing in Genesis or anything available to the readers of this story, which is to say it might be in Deuteronomy, but the characters in the story, I said readers in the story, I should say characters in the story, don't know Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy may be known to the audience if the text is written in exile after Deuteronomy was written, perhaps in the time of Josiah in the 7th century BCE, but the characters don't know that. And so in the story, birthright and blessing, at least the paternal blessing, not Yahweh's blessing, are simply human customs, and in this case, facing the challenge of what happens when there are twins. Now we're going to look a little more at the presumption that many scholars make, again without much evidence, that Isaac is weak as a father and is being manipulated by Rebekah and Jacob. And that's a suggestion that comes out of the straightforward reading of the story here. But I went over last time, and I won't go over it again now, some evidence for why Isaac is in fact not weak at all, but is perfectly strong as a character and knows what he's doing. And that leads to the possibility, as I was pointing to last time, that in the introductory material in 26:34 to 35 about Esau's Hittite women, we heard that the Hittite women made the spirit bitter for both Isaac and Rebekah. So even though we know that Isaac favors Esau and Rebekah favors Jacob, they were together in whatever it was, and I looked at it 2 videos ago, that caused their spirit to be bitter because of the Hittite wives of Esau. That leads to the issue of whether this whole thing is a conspiracy not of Rebekah and Jacob, which is what we see on the surface of the story and we'll look at today, but behind the scenes between Rebekah and Isaac to prepare Jacob to go back to the old country and face his trickster uncle Laban, Rebekah's brother. And that's the perspective that I'm convinced by, but I'm going to show a number of other perspectives as we go, because there are scholars besides myself who see it that way, including Zucker and another one we'll look at later. But the majority of scholars seem to favor the straightforward reading that Isaac is being manipulated by Rebekah and Jacob. And as we enter into the first part of the plan here, I will note right away for readers who might not question, as I am, the presumption that the conspiracy is between Rebekah and Jacob. She suggests he's going to go to the flock and she's going to make the same kind of food that Esau is going to make from whatever he catches and kills with his bow and arrow. But you don't have to be a connoisseur of wild food to know the difference between food that came from a domestic animal and food that came from a wild animal, especially if it's your favorite food. So already from the beginning, there are clues that we should be suspicious, and there'll be more clues in the confrontation between Jacob and his father in the scenes that follow. But I want to suggest that right away as one of the pieces of evidence, along with the fact that we were told that the spirit was made bitter for both parents by Esau's wives, that goes into our story here. So another thing we've been looking at is how our story here echoes both the story of the birthright of it, which is no big surprise here. It follows a similar pattern, as you can see there. We also saw last time how the "my son" and "here I am" echo Abraham and Isaac, and back in Genesis 22. And there's also echoes of Genesis 12 here, as we see between where Pharaoh and Isaac are likened by some, and we saw that with Hugh White in the last one. So that's what we're going to be looking at. And as I noted last time when we looked at this part, 1 to 4, and now I have our passage here on the screen, they're parallel and they're different. So before we look at the details on the left side of the screen, I want to go over this here. The part that's just in black bold is the introduction from the narrator here. And this part here in this brownish gray part is what Isaac says to Esau that's different than what Rebekah tells Jacob he said to Esau. That's different also from what Rebekah says to Jacob on her own. But we're going to look at how carefully she shapes it differently, specifically adding this phrase here, before Yahweh's face and before I face death, which I had to translate that way because, as you'll see, it doesn't sound like that in the new RSV. So she covers some of the same ground that we heard and that she heard, but she's clearly changing this for the sake of Jacob. And what we don't know here is where people are. Art, as we've seen previously, situates us in a house, and it references a house, although we'd heard earlier in the story that they were in a tent near Beersheba. So it's not clear where Rebekah could be listening. It doesn't say where she's listening. We just hear she's listening. This is different than listening when Sarah was listening at the entrance to her tent back in chapter 18 to the divine visitors talking to Abraham about her. But here we have no specification, nor do we know where Jacob is. So we hear that Rebekah is close enough to hear what what Isaac said to Esau, and of course Esau didn't respond, so she didn't hear anything from him. And she can tell it to Jacob, but we don't know where Jacob was. So presumably from what she's saying, Jacob didn't hear it himself, but since he's a man of the tent, as we heard, how far away might he be? We simply don't know. The text isn't telling us. So let's look at how Rebekah presents a story and begin to consider whether this is a conspiracy between Rebekah and Jacob, or that's only the surface and behind the scene is another conspiracy between the two parents. So now, and there's no Hebrew there, it's really just and Rebekah was listening. It's a form of the verb shema suggested as overhearing. And as we hear down here again from White, from giving his perspective, which I noted last time around the issue of the savory food and its relationship with Isaac's character. He says, the crisis has thus been reached between two contending perspectives. On the one hand is the desire-driven mentality of visually oriented but blind Isaac, who by elevating Esau will establish the link between the generations on the basis of primogeniture, the violent adventure of the hunt, and the taste of venison stew. On the other is the oral mentality of Rebekah, who nourishes the memory of the oracle which overturned primogeniture and loves her quiet, clever son who thinks before he acts. But neither is totally affirmed or totally negated. But notice what's at work there. That's White illustrating exactly the assumption that I made, that the conspiracy here is between Rebekah and Isaac, and there's something wrong with between Rebekah and Jacob, and there's something wrong with Isaac and Esau, as expressed here, their violent preference for stew rather than for the sophisticated, civilized food from the flock. Is that really true? I was showing last time how there's really not evidence to support that, but you can decide for yourself. So Rebekah was listening when Isaac spoke to his son Esau. And of course it's their son. It may be Isaac's preferred son, but the narrator is providing Rebekah's point of view here. And the timing is perfect, of course. When Esau went to the field and hunt for game and bring it, Rebekah said to her son. And as I was noting in the introductory comments, the story is set out in a constant dialogue setting between the different combinations of dialogue partners. That fits the standards of later drama, but I don't know if that fit the standards of drama at the time that the story is written, probably in exile, dealing with the question of Babylon and the post-exilic issue of Ezra and Nehemiah and their prohibition on marrying foreign wives. Again, I went over that in the introductory video. So Rebekah said to her son Jacob, the contrast between his son Esau and her son Jacob, I heard, omitting as notice he always says the behold, so behold, I heard your father say to your brother Esau. And she underscores the kinship reference there. Notice she didn't say, I heard your father say to his son Esau, highlighting that they are brothers. But and you can follow the differences here. So she says, bring me game, and the differences I note below are what you see here. Bring me game and prepare for me savory food to eat. Notice that she leaves out the hunt game, and she leaves out the quiver and bow, and the things that we noted last time point back to Ishmael, just as what she points to will point forward to Rachel and to Joseph in the later story. So bring me game and prepare for me savory food to eat, that I may bless you before Yahweh, before I die. And the notice that he leaves out both faces, the face of Yahweh and the face of facing death. So literally, that's what's at issue here. The left-name motif to face death. So so I may bless you before Yahweh's face, before I face death. And the face theme isn't a priority here, but it will be precisely on the other side of the chiasm when Jacob and Esau face off, and Jacob uses the word pene for face 4 times in one verse, just before he faces his brother. So that's part of the chiastic connection between the two stories. So the face of Yahweh and facing death. So, what is the effect of that? The effect of that, of saying it's before Yahweh, is to suggest that it's a sacred blessing of some kind. It's not from Yahweh, but it's in the face of Yahweh, so it has divine, at least cover, if not initiation. Although we don't know what Jacob thinks of that because we don't hear. So here, Rebekah substitutes for Yahweh in something I'm going to show us in just a minute. Now she says, using va'atah exactly as here. Now then, and now then here. My son, repeated a first time here. The narrator told us her son, but now she says my son out loud. Obey my word, or literally, hear my voice as I command you. And of course, that's exactly what you're supposed to be doing to Yahweh. And so here Rebekah is inserting herself just after she said that the blessing of the Father would be before the face of Yahweh. She's inserting herself in the role of Yahweh, the voice to be listened to. And many have suggested, well, that's unusual in a patriarchal environment to listen to the voice of a woman. But actually, when we look at the data of Genesis, it's not. We can see here the listening to the voice, Shema Kol, here in Genesis. So we heard Sarah saying to Abraham, telling her about Hagar, and Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. Then God said to Abraham, whatever Sarai says to do, listen to her voice. So Sarah's voice there is explicit divine legitimation. Then we have our scene here twice. Listen to my voice as I command you. Let your curse be on me, my son. Only listen to my voice. In another generation, we'll hear Rachel say, God has judged me and has heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore, she named him Dan, based on the fact that her voice has been heard. So Rachel says that God heard her voice. God tells Abraham to listen to Sarah's voice, and Abraham listened to Sarah's voice without God saying so. The only man in Genesis we're told that anybody's supposed to listen to his voice is Cain's descendant Lamech, who tells his wives to listen to my voice, and they're wiped out in the flood. That whole generation is wiped out in the flood. But of listening to Yahweh's voice, we only hear after the Akedah story in chapter 22 that the angel tells Abraham that he'll be blessed because he's listened to the voice of Yahweh. And we hear that again in chapter 26, as we just saw, in relation to Isaac, that Abraham obeyed my voice and kept my charge, etc. So we hear about Abraham obeying Yahweh's voice, but we hear of Abraham also obeying Sarah's voice and told by God to do so. So it is not as unusual as one might think to have a woman be telling a character to listen to my voice. But to listen to my voice in connection with the command here is the only time there's a command from a woman to a man outside the book of Esther, which is really an interesting point, I think, that Rebekah has really put herself in the dominant role here. But we don't know if she's doing that just on her own or if she's doing that as part of the deal behind the scenes with her husband Isaac. So she says to him now, this is the voice that she commands. And my note below from Hoover, citing two women whose works I could not get access to, unfortunately, Fuchs and Allen. And he notes this. This is my introduction, but then we hear from him. While many male commentators criticize Rebekah for deception, he cites Fuchs for arguing on behalf of women's power in the presence of patriarchy. He notes that the text, quote, refrains from judgment, thus insinuating that the deception is not chastised, but viewed positively by the narrator because of its enhancement of Jacob's status. But similarly, Christine Garside Allen calls this, quote, a courageous and holy act, unquote, of self-sacrifice on behalf of her son. And that's all still seeming like it's all on her, though, that she's engaging not in an act that should be criticized because it's deception, but a bold act trying to seize the blessing for her own son. But what if it's neither? What if it's a clever act with her husband to help her son Jacob go safely back to the old country to get a wife? We'll have to continue to ask that question as we go. So she says, go please, just as Isaac said, come please, to the flock, which connects us with Rachel in 29, where she's at the flock when nobody but Jacob ends up there around her. And we'll see other connections here around the kids, which are connected with the Joseph story when his brothers try to fool nobody but Jacob with the blood of a kid on Jacob's special coat that his father had made him. So kids will play a role in the story a couple more times as we go. So just as Esau's instructions pointed back to Ishmael, and at the end of our chapter he will go to Ishmael to get a wife, the instructions to Jacob point to Rachel and to Laban, which is where he'll go immediately after our scene. So get me 2 choice kids. Why 2? You wouldn't think that no matter how small a baby goat is, that one older man can eat more than one, but I've never cooked a baby goat, so I don't know. Maybe it's supposedly for the whole family, but she says it's for him. So she says, go to the flock and get me 2 choice kids. The word for choice, ez, here is also a word for a goat or a she-goat. And that interestingly recalls the only other previous use in 15:9, where Abraham offers a goat in sacrifice to Yahweh. And this also underscores the point that I was making earlier around the birthright. Just as the birthright brought up issues of whether it was from Yahweh or not, so does this, because Abraham was doing that in response to the command of Yahweh, but Jacob will be doing it in response to the command of his mother. So not confusing the divine command with the human command. So that I may prepare or make, just again like matching verse 4. But she uses the same word, savory food, as if it's the same kind of food, whether it comes from the wild animal or presumably a deer or something, as it comes from a goat. And that's an interesting thing, that it won't have the same taste, but it falls in the same category. Such as he likes, and yet again, the NORSV turns the love into likes. And I won't go through this whole quote down here below, because it's also from White, providing the perspective we've already seen. And we'll just go to our last verse. And she continues, you shall take it to your father to eat, so that he may bless you before he dies. Or for the sake of, here, for the sake of that. So notice it's not the connection. This is the food that Esau loves, and not the food, the food that Esau makes that Isaac loves, and is not associated with Jacob. And at this point in the story, she's not given him any more of the plan. The only plan is that he's to go get these kids, and that she'll prepare him. So all he has to do is go to the flock and bring in a couple of baby goats. And understandably, he's going to find that to be problematic, and that's what we'll look at next time. Before we complete it for today, let's just note how the differences make a difference here. So she's saying she will prepare it, and you will take it, so he may bless you. So plainly what's at issue as Jacob hears this, notice he doesn't say that you will say you're Jacob, and she already told him that I heard your father say, bring me this so I may bless you, Esau. So Jacob is left certainly wondering what exactly is the plan here. And as we look at the character of Jacob unfold, we have to ask our question. I'm being suspicious of his mother and Isaac, but is he naive enough that they can get away with tricking him here, which sets the premise for he's not going to be clever enough to trick Laban. But that's a question we'll have to read the entire story to make sense of. We'll continue with it next time. See you then.